Hello, on behalf of the Washington U Alumni Association, I'm excited to welcome alumni, parents, and friends to the tour, A Tale of Three Cities, that is taken from the Where We Live Now series. Hi, I'm Jay Ryder, and I'm going to be the moderator for today. And just a little bit about myself is that I, along with Norm Spatz, our speaker, received my bachelor's degree from Washington U in 1970 and my master's of architecture in 1972. Looking back on that experience, I now realize that maybe we were the first contestants in a pilot show called The Survivor, because the first time we met with the dean in 1966, there were 80 of us. And he said, look to your right, look to your left. At the end of 4 years, those people won't be there. And he was right. 40 of us graduated with our bachelor's with a major in architecture. And of that 40, 10 of us from the original freshman class went ahead and got our master's degree. So it really was a survivor experience. Now, Norm and Jenna, I'm going to surprise you because I'm going to go off script a little bit. And I'm going to give a shout out to some of the other Givens Hall survivors that are joining us or enrolled in today's presentation, and that's Marge Miller-Bronstein and John Parman and Bill Wishmeyer and Rebecca Wurzberger. Also, as a member of the class of 70 50th reunion committee, I want to encourage not only the class of 1970, but the class of 1971 and 72 to return to St. Louis and the campus, because the first time in the university's history, they're going to be holding 3 50th reunions collectively. So it'll be a really unique time to interact with other people you went to school with that weren't necessarily in your class. There'll be opportunities to meet as one large group and also as by individual classes. So if you haven't been back to the campus or St. Louis in the last 5 years, you'll be remarkably surprised at the changes that have happened in a very, very positive way. So now, Norm and Jenna, you can exhale because I'm going back on script. A sigh of relief. Some housekeeping items. Before we begin, I'd like to explain the format for today's session. Your screen will feature me and Norm, and we ask that you keep your videos off and microphones muted throughout the event. Following the presentation, we will start the Q&A session, and you are encouraged to participate by asking questions through the chat box. Thank you to everyone who already submitted questions via the registration. During the Q&A session, we'll get to as many questions as we can. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the Alumni Association YouTube channel. Now it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Norm Spatz. Norm is, as I said, is a 1970 and 72 graduate of Washington University, receiving both his bachelor's degree and master's of architecture degree. A proud member of New Jersey, Norm is an equally proud immigrant to Canada. After a decade and a half working in Montreal as an architect, specializing in residential renovation, Norm won a number of honors, including mentions from the City of Montreal and first prize in the Pardon my Français, the 1982 Crédit Foncier Award, sponsored by Heritage Canada. He was also a founder of the historic walking tour program of Save Montreal in 1982, which is currently administered by the Heritage Montreal, and recently the Where We Live Now walking tour program given by the Jewish Public Library, from which the Three Cities tour is drawn. Norm entered the CEGEP system, which is the Provincial Junior College Network, in 1989, teaching architectural technology and French. He then retired, teaching English as a second language. He's really reinvented himself a number of times. In between, he became the English editor of a Quebec government ministries website to promote the use of information technology in CEGEPs. And in 2015, Norm retired and now has time for other activities such as writing, fiction and giving walking tours. Married to Rita Bauer in 1985. They have one son named Sam, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce and welcome Norm Spatz. Take it away, Norm.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for the introduction, even the parts where you did go off script. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time adding any more information about that. I'm going to begin the presentation right away. He says, hopefully, yes. So here we have a tale of 3 cities. And what's really quite funny about this is the original title of this presentation was A Tale of 2.5 Cities. But the city that was the half city was part of the people that were involved in its presentation. And the library of that city was Côte Saint-Luc, sort of said, you can't call Côte Saint-Luc a half city. And so we have the name change to A Tale of 3 Cities. But keep in mind, you will understand at the end of this tour why 2.5 Cities might have been a better title. So here we have the official map of the city of Côte Saint-Luc. And later official maps did not always show the gulf of territory between the different parts of the map. If you look here, there's a very tiny 1/2 block long, 3 block wide, I guess, or in the reverse, whatever, sort of exclave of the city of Côte Saint-Luc. And just to call your attention, I hate when these things go ahead, just to call your attention, there is a small additional exclave of the city that's more horizontal over here. These 2 areas do not touch the rest of the city of Côte Saint-Luc. And essentially this entire lecture is an explanation of how these 2 bizarre areas came to exist. So let's do a close-up on, now just very quickly, what you see here, the balconies are in the city of Côte Saint-Luc, high rises. That is the limit of the territory of this area. The sort of half timbered houses that you see in the background are in a different municipality, the town of Hampstead. More about that later, but let's at this point do a close-up of the exclave. I tend to call it the digit, but whatever we're calling it, here it is. A number of things that we should realize about this are, number 1, city streets change names at the border. So here we go from Langhorne in the town of Hampstead to Dupuis in the city of Montreal. We've got Isabelle in the city of Montreal, and we've got, this is Ellerdale in the city of Hampstead. Queen Mary Road goes right through. But if you look at this, and it took me a while to realize that, I think I can expand, yes. If you look at this, what is quite amazing about this is there is a tiny little tongue of territory that inches forward on Queen Mary Road and touches the city limit of Montreal. So that in effect, this little exclave of Côte Saint-Luc is divided into 2 separate parts. So there's this little island of municipal territory and then the island of municipal territory that is above it. Okay, moving right ahead. This situation obviously didn't begin in this area. And those of you that attended my first tour know that it all comes back, I shouldn't say to the De Carry house, but to the De Carrys. NDG was settled. NDG is the part of Montreal that is adjacent to this little exclave of territory. NDG stands for Notre-Dame de Grâce. And there's a borough of the city of Montreal that is Côte-des-Neiges Notre-Dame de Grâce. What was the beginning of this entire bizarre history is the fact that the territory for the whole western part of Montreal, the Montreal metropolitan area, was originally called Côte Saint-Pierre. And Côte Saint-Pierre is an area of land that is atop a cliff that overlooks the original settlement of Montreal, which was called Ville-Marie, the city of Marie. And Côte Saint-Pierre now encompasses several suburbs, including the city of Côte Saint-Luc and the boroughs of Notre-Dame de Grâce, Côte-des-Neiges. And this all comes from a daring idea. The first Europeans to settle the plains to the west and high above the young settlement of the colony of Ville-Marie did so 8 years after the colony's founding on November 18th, 1650. Their motivation was security. Very early on in the history of the island, the first settlers of New France realized that surviving meant being alerted about an imminent attack by members of the Iroquois First Nations. And the First Nations had a culture that was very unmaterialistic. They didn't believe in land ownership. And one would think that that was a wonderful thing, except it really didn't protect them because, as we know, European culture very much accepts the idea of the ownership of land. And so because no one owned the land, when the French came to the island, they decided that they would claim it, and they owned the land. And the First Nations were not exactly thrilled to discover that there were these people whose culture was so totally different from theirs that they were actually interested in keeping people out. And what had started as a reasonably okay relationship between European culture and First Nations culture turned out to be a little more hostile as time went on. And the threat of Indian attack was a constant in the colony of the little colony of Ville-Marie. And so this first settler in the area, Côte Saint-Pierre, was Jean Descaries. And I know all the French names get to be confusing. It all blends as one, but I'll try and keep them straight. Jean Descaries and his friend Jean Leduc had a super idea. They said, if we settle along this cliff high above the city, we can be on the lookout if there's an Indian attack coming, and we can fire a gun to warn the settlers so that they can run back into their fort and defend themselves. The idea was considered really good, and the commander of the colony, de Maisonneuve, gave them grants of 30 acres each, and they went on the top of the cliff and built their homes and founded farms, etc. And we'll see it in a minute. I might as well go to it now. This is the area where they first made that settlement. So to the left is the sort of super hospital for the English community. That's the McGill University Hospital Center. And if you look, you can see in the distance that downtown is visible. And if you turn in the other direction, the St. Lawrence River is visible. And so these people could see the river and see if there was an attack coming and warn the residents of Ville-Marie that there was a possible attack coming. So the system worked. And what was really interesting was the fact that once you did this, hold on one sec. The goal of alerting the settlers of Ville-Marie of an impending surprise attack by members of the First Nations was achieved, but as well, there was another side effect. An entire new neighborhood, and I'm using this word very deliberately, or coat, was created because of this activity. And so the settlers built their homes, and we saw in the earlier slide that there was the Descaries house, which actually survived well into the 20th century when it was destroyed by the Canadian Pacific Railway to create more a facility within their train yards. And also to say that, you know, you're saying to yourself, well, gee, if there was such a danger of an Indian attack, what was happening to these people who did not have a fort to retreat to once they had given their warning? And the truth is that they paid a price. It is known that the de Carey family suffered the death of one young son, and that Jean Le Duc had to postpone the construction of his house because of the threat of Indian attack. All right, moving right along, if I can remember how to get my notes to go right. What we are looking at here is a map that I got from the registry office, the provincial registry office, the Registre Foncier. And it's not a map of a particular time or place. It was sort of a tracking map that they used to remember lot numbers. The area are you seeing my arrow moving, by the way? Yes, good. All right. So, oh, actually, I think there's this fancy thing here, laser pointer. Oh, cool. All right. So here we've got laser pointer. This area is Côte Saint-Luc Road, and it sort of twists a little over here because what it's doing, this area here is the back end of Mount Royal. The city of Montreal was founded between Montreal Harbor and Mount Royal, and there's a sort of limited territory for the colony to be formed. And this area was on the other end of the mountain. And so Côte Saint-Luc Road is veering off towards actually Côte Saint-Antoine Road, which is another story that we'll get to. But Côte Saint-Luc Road is veering off to Côte Saint-Antoine Road, which goes in front of the mountain and then leads directly to the original settlement. And what we're seeing here are a number of farms. And I would say to people to answer, but I won't. I won't ask. I'll ask the question and answer the question, which is, what do you notice about these farms? And what you should answer, if you could and weren't muted, would be that the farms are very long and narrow. And I can tell you point blank that although this seems very long and narrow, farm number 68, lot number 68, which belonged to one of the early families that was an Urtebise, this area is currently about 5 blocks wide. And this little farm 68 is the area where our little exclave of Côte Saint-Luc lies. And these farms are divided, I think in English the word is the range system. In French, it's the système des rangs. And the way that the logic of this, which was really genius, was the fact that as people settled the land, they built their homes along the main system of transportation and communication, which for most of the province of Quebec was the St. Lawrence River. And so everybody had a tiny little bit of land along the river where they would build their house, and there might be a road that went along the river as well, but the river itself was the main system of transportation and communication. And if you got an area that became more densely settled, what would happen would be that a road would be put in behind the farms that were facing the river. And that road would have the same function as the river, providing a source of transportation and communication for people to get to the urban centers, of which there were not a lot, and they were far and few. And so Côte Saint-Luc Road was the means of transportation and communication between the city of Côte Saint-Luc, which was in the main part of Côte Saint-Luc that you saw on that first map, and downtown, which is what the settlement of Ville-Marie became. And now on the next slides, you will see how Côte Saint-Luc came to exist. So as I said, this is the area where our little exclave was. Oh, and that's the location. I used to give this lecture for my synagogue. That's where my synagogue is, which is in the area. And here we have okay, moving right along. Here we have these one of the illustrations that came from an article in the Cahiers de Géographie du Québec by Beauregard in 1984. And anyone who does research into the history of Montreal, or for that matter, anywhere else in the province of Quebec, learns that in French, the term côte, or that's what I learned, meant hill. Did the founders of the city of Côte Saint-Luc and its eponymous road really refer to the cliff that was the original reason for the area to be settled as a reason for giving the road its name of Côte? And it always bothered me. And this article provided an answer that allowed me to stop searching for the hill that was the inspiration of Côte Saint-Luc and begin appreciating the very special way that the island of Montreal was settled using the primitive technology that our ancestors had at their disposal and given the challenges of the Canadian climate here. Beauregard, the author, wrote in his abstract of the article, "Côte are the structural elements of the first settlement patterns on Montreal Island. Nowhere else in the province of Quebec have they reached such importance as a system of settlement. They appeared as such about 1665 along the banks of the St. Lawrence River and in the inner part of the island," and that's the real unusual one, "at the turn of the 16th century. Their development can be traced through diverse documents until 1834, when Monsieur Jobin, who was a surveyor, produced a map showing the system of côte in their heyday. Unlike the more distant seigneurie or lordships in New France, the island of Montreal was not settled as part of a regional or provincial system of communication and transportation. They were already there. They were on the island of Montreal. They didn't need to get there. The lots were long and narrow with a short frontage on the banks of the river so that everyone had convenient access to the water and they were close to neighbors who could communicate with one another. But once the settlement of Ville Marie was founded in 1642, the island of Montreal was no longer an isolated patch of virgin territory, and a way had to be found to settle the interior of the island. And we can begin to see that this is what is happening. And it was a modification of that early system where they were along the river. Now they were along a road. There was a road that went through the côte, and that was their means of transportation and communication. All right, so here we are. This is really action from the late 1600s. Let's go a little further. We're going up to 1879, and I always love Hopkins maps because they're so good. And in 1663, all right, so we're moving up. The ownership of the island passed to the Sulpician order, which is an order of the Catholic Church. And they really and truly were given the ownership of the entire island. So they were the administrators, they were the lords of the island. And at a later time, as we're going to see, if you had a farm with your name on it and you were selling it, you had to go to the Sulpicians and buy the rights to your farm. They had to sell them to you, but you had to buy the rights from the traditional owners of the entire island. So let's see how the system worked in Côte Saint-Luc. At some point, the settlers in Côte Saint-Luc would have called on the Sulpicians to establish a chemin de roi, a royal road. The superior of the seminary or his delegate would come to the settlement and determine the route of the road that was going to lead from the côte to, for want of a better word, downtown. So with the agreement of the residents, markers with the Sulpician stamp would be placed along the route. It was the responsibility of the settlers to clear the land where the road crossed their territory. They were also obliged to build bridges across small streams. And there was one small stream in the area, the Rivière Saint-Pierre, which by this system had its first bridge constructed over it, which was built in 1670, but probably not in the current limits of the city of Côte Saint-Luc. As the island became more populous, the required width of the roads passed from 18 or 20 feet in 1670 to 36 feet along the river, where boats needed to be pulled by ropes because there was a rapids in this area. And that is the main reason that the city of Montreal exists, because ships coming from the ocean had to stop at Montreal. You couldn't go beyond it because of the rapids in the St. Lawrence River. And generally what would happen would be that materials were unloaded in Montreal and transported, and I might add, through the area that we're looking at now, to the town of Lachine. Lachine in French means China, because when they first found Lachine, they thought they were in China. And in Lachine, the goods would be unloaded to boats that would go through the Great Lakes. So that is really the basis of the reason why Montreal became a great city. Once the path of the road had been determined by the Sulpicians in agreement with the residents, the road would be constructed, probably not very well. And here on this map from 1879, we can see how the descendants of the de Carys and other early settlers came to be landowners throughout the neighborhood as younger children established new farms. That de Cary homestead that I showed you at the beginning of the tour was always given to the eldest son, and then the other de Carys would establish themselves on farms in the area. For instance, here we have Benjamin de Cary, T. de Cary, there's Sarrazin, another early family. And then just to let you know, it's 1879 already. We're there, guys. We've got Joseph Snowdon. Woof, how did that name get in there? And here we've got the Murrays. So there was the beginning of a mixture, but this area was really the territory of the descendants of those early settlers. And what had made the settlement more viable, so I guess what I'll do here is show you that again is the area of our little exclave, again with my synagogue indicated in by a symbol. In 1665, an army regiment arrived from France, and as time passed, the families that had settled on the cliff got a little more confident. The children were fruitful. The entire area was filled with farms that were worked and owned by one of the many de Cary descendants, the Leduc, the Ertebis. People living in the main settlements in Ville Marie were also reassured by the arrival of troops and began petitioning the government of the city for land grants that were a little further from the safety of the city's protective walls. At this point, the term côte really caught on with Montrealers. And whether they considered the meaning hill or edge, or even there's an expression in French, côte à côte, a côte came to mean a small settlement outside of the walls of the city, particularly in Montreal, but in other Quebec cities as well. And the little green area here that I've just outlined belonged to Alphonse Ertebis, again, one of the descendants of the first settlers. Okay, so moving on. All right, now, the city of Montreal was, by 1850, was experiencing enormous growth. After 1850, population growth was fed by Irish immigrants who were fleeing the harsh conditions of the potato famine, and it was a misery. After 1860, Ireland ceased to be a major source of population growth for the city and was replaced by an in-migration of French Canadians from rural Quebec who were coming in to try their luck with the industrialization that was occurring along the canal that was built to connect the two sides of the rapids. It's called the Lachine Canal. And then by the end of this period, there was a huge migration of Jews coming in from Central Europe who were fleeing harsh conditions. The city of Montreal realized that the area that was growing was going to be outside of the city limits unless they did something very quick to expand their limits. And by 1867, they were looking at this area to expand their limits. I thought originally this was true. I discovered it was only a proposal. In this proposal, this is the proposed city limit over here. And then here we have Côte Saint-Luc Road, which dead-ended over here and then went south to go around the mountain over here. And here we can see the lots that were divided using Côte Saint-Luc Road as a means of transportation. If you notice suddenly over here, and this is what we covered in our last tour, suddenly the direction of the lots changes because they're going to another road, which was going over the mountain from the north, Côte des Neiges. All right, so we're about ready. We've set things up, and I can tell you that eventually, and you can see my line being drawn here, the city limit of Montreal by 1910 came to be right along here, north of Côte Saint-Luc Road. So they were pretty close in their projections of where the city limits needed to go, but it wasn't perfect. And right now we're ready to meet the next character in our story of how this exclave came to be. So your first character was Jean Descaries, and now your second character is going to be Thomas Francis O'Brien. Thomas Francis O'Brien was born in Ireland in 1846 and not only lived through the ravages of the Irish potato famine, but from what I've read, was really scarred by it. He was forever insecure about money. He escaped the poverty of his youth by immigrating to Canada and became marginally successful as a merchant and vendor of spices. But as we would say in IT, this guy was a visionary. He was an early adopter. He realized that there was going to be enormous growth in this area and invested heavily in land, realizing the potential profit that one could make in Montreal. He bought 2 lots from Alphonse Heurtebise in 1873. And I can tell you, because I've been through the deeds, that Alphonse Heurtebise was finally convinced to buy the land, and then he had to go to the registry and literally buy his own farm from the Sulpicians. It cost him, I think at the time, $800 to buy land that had been in his family for generations. And his idea, this is going back to Thomas Francis O'Brien now, not Heurtebise. Heurtebise was a farmer and he did not want to have the city come into his territory. Thomas Francis O'Brien was ready to see an urban tissue grow in this area. So Alphonse, Thomas Francis O'Brien got the idea that he was going to market a real estate development, and it was marketed under the name of Mount Royal Vale. Now, I've gotten the subdivision plan that he filed with the city in 1873. And this is a really funny document because it's incredibly long, because obviously the land that they were subdividing was incredibly long. And just to clue you in that the direction south is to the left of the screen. So this is going north, this is going south. This is where the city of Montreal's municipal limits came to be established, right along the street, which is called Monkland. And we're going to see that Monkland's name changes to MacDonald in 1910, but for the moment it's Monkland, and this other street here is Dufferin Road. And the names were chosen by Thomas Francis O'Brien. Moving right along. Sorry that I sound so disjointed at times, but I'm juggling my notes with the screen. All right, so here is not only the legal subdivision plan, but a promotional plan for Mount Royal Vale that was put out by Thomas Francis O'Brien. And a typical lot size in Mount Royal Vale was 40 feet wide by 120 feet deep. Although generous in today's terms for Montreal, because the lot that my house is on is 25 feet wide, the lots were for residential construction only, and an unexpected result of the wider lot size was the development of apartment buildings and duplexes, as opposed to the vision of Thomas Francis O'Brien of gracious single-family homes. What was Thomas Francis O'Brien doing to attract people to his development? An important feature was the horse-drawn trolley that went to downtown for commuters that was being offered from 1878 to 1894. The line started out Mount Royal Vale, probably near the Queen's High Road, which is now Queen Mary Road, and to Carey, probably arriving in the middle of Old Montreal at Place d'Armes. And in winter, the wheels on the trolley would be replaced by runners for a sleigh. Now, the trolley didn't end in 1894. It simply became electrified. And the area became one of the centers of Montreal's mass transit area because this line had existed originally. And I don't have fact, but I believe that probably this trolley was also part of the vision of Thomas Francis O'Brien. So let's take a look again. 1879 was a great year for maps. So let's move forward. Here we have an 1879 map showing farmers' fields. And again, you can see the preponderance of de Carey. You know, we don't see that many of Les Ducs. There were a few, but the early settlers, the Goujon is another family that came in. But what is really interesting here is in all of these farmers' fields, and you see occasionally, like along the Lachine Road, there's a couple of houses. We see the little dots of houses. There's not a lot of houses here. There's a couple of houses along Côte Saint-Luc Road, but look what's happening here. We've got a system of streets. Those were the streets that were proposed by Thomas Francis O'Brien. And so let's get that up there. Again, the area where our little exclave is. Now, these were probably not, they were legally established streets, but they probably weren't real roads. They were not paved, probably. Water service and sewage were almost certainly not available because those services are the responsibility of the municipality according to Quebec law. And so the municipality in this area, which was the city of Côte Saint-Luc, would have had to add those services, and most of the municipality was farmers who were not interested in increasing their taxes to support property developers. So probably there were no services. And then once the city of Montreal border was established, different municipalities would have serviced the area at different times, which is an important consideration in our story. Okay, so let's step out a little now and step forward a little and take a look at the title page or the index page from a 1908 Atlas of the City of Montreal. So here's our 1908 Atlas of the City of Montreal. And just to give you a bit of geography, so these are now what are called the Expo Islands. This was actually Ile Sainte-Hélène, which was one of the islands for Expo 67. This is Montreal Harbor. You can see the docks over here. This is the old city, which in 1879 was still downtown. By 1890, this is the mountain. Downtown, it sort of moved a little bit north over here through these sort of incipient suburbs that were here. And this was the, I believe the canal, yeah, it was built in the 1850s. This was the canal that was built to connect, to go around the falls. This was the Lachine Canal. And this is our area. This is Côte Saint-Pierre that we're looking at. And let's take a look a little more closely at that area. So here we are, gonna move forward. So this is 30 years later. Let's take a look at what was happening. Westmount was the first area, the first, I guess, micro neighborhood in this area to be settled, mainly by English office workers, the wealthy English office workers. It became a very distinguished place to live, and it needed to install its own sewage. This place is on the side of the mountain. It needs quality civic institutions. It needs well-paved roads. It needs good snow clearance. And so in 1876, Westmount said to the municipality of Côte Saint-Luc, sorry, we need to go on our own. We're becoming a municipality. We've had enough. And you know, if you don't want to put in the sewers and the water lines and everything, we will do it ourselves. We'll float a bond issue, and that's that. And it was a very similar thing in 1893 for this little suburb that was called Saint-Pierre-des-Liens, and which is now Ville Saint-Pierre, but Saint-Pierre-des-Liens was a residential area that was formed by workers who were working along the Lachine Canal over here. That's where all the industry settled. And so the largely Francophone or French-speaking workers moved up the hill and built homes that were out of the pollution that the industry was creating below. Because remember, this is that cliff that we were talking about that sort of went around like this. And cliff in French is falaise or escarpment. And the area now is known as the Falaise Saint-Jacques. What's also interesting is that in 1897, the town of Montreal West also seceded from Côte Saint-Luc because they had a stop on a commuter train that had been built. And once the commuter train was built, again, office workers, largely English speaking, came from downtown and were building homes in the area. And again, they needed services. The farmers in Côte Saint-Luc were not willing. And then by 1903, this area, the wave of urbanization was in full throttle. People were moving into the area. Houses were being built. It was mainly English. And the whole southern part of what was Côte Saint-Luc was just one property developer after another. And finally, they organized and said, we're going to float a bond issue and We're going to build sewers and build trolley tracks, because there was a deal by the trolley company that if they built a trolley track, they would run a line out there, which would get more people into this suburban development. And the farmers in Côte Saint-Luc again said, we don't want to become a part of that. And so in a strange twist of fate, in 1903, the city of Côte Saint-Luc seceded from the forming city of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce because it was mainly residential. And you can see that the farmers south of Côte Saint-Luc Road, who did not want to get involved in bond issues, and tax, were sort of inclined to remain with Côte Saint-Luc, so that you get this very odd sort of jagged municipal limit to the north of the city. And to this day, these areas have different vocations. They became sort of the schoolyards and the little parks at the bottom and stuff like that, because the land was kept open as the land in the area between developed around them. Okay, so, and in 1903, when Côte Saint-Luc split off from Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, as we can see here, what happened was that limit was Monkland Avenue that I showed you on the plan earlier. And so that's how the city limit of Montreal, between Montreal and Côte Saint-Luc, came to be established in that area. But you're noticing probably, oh, look, it's a whole city of Côte Saint-Luc that's going right to the border. What could have happened? Well, guys, sorry, I got to advance my, I get so screwed up with these notes, sorry. All right, so we're going to go in a little. You know what, I don't think I need to tell you. Well, very quickly, just to tell you what had happened. By this time, the streets that had been planned by Thomas Francis O'Brien were actually being paved. And certainly in the area, this is MacDonald. So everything in this area was the city of Montreal, and they were getting services. But the surveying that O'Brien had done in 1867 left something to be desired. And as you can see, they started Snowdon on one side, and then they started Snowdon on the other side, and whoops, they didn't meet. And there was a street that was planned here, didn't make it quite through. It eventually became a park because it was so stupid that nobody would pave it. And we got, again, this MacDonald Avenue, which is what Monkland Avenue became, again, didn't sort of line up, and so it became a little crooked. There were all sorts of inconsistencies that were done with the city planning of Thomas Francis O'Brien. And if we look, I always find this sign a little cute. Okay, again, 1 second. Here we have Aumont Street, which was originally named after a city councillor in the municipality of NDG, which went bankrupt because of the bond issues that it floated to create sewers and water lines and everything like that. They went broke. Aumont was named after a city councillor in the municipality of NDG who was a real supporter of the municipality of NDG becoming a part of Montreal. And now Aumont Street is about 60 feet long. As you saw, it's that little bump and has nothing on it, but he did get his name. And what happened to Thomas Francis O'Brien? Actually, it's a very sad story. Great expectations. O'Brien never made the fortune that he had anticipated from his developments. He was sent to Kingston Prison in 1880 for fraud, largely out of desperation because he needed the money. He was always on the edge of losing his land. And O'Brien lived the rest of his life after 1873 in Mount Royal Vale. O'Brien's death at the relatively young age of 60 occurred in the city of Buffalo, New York in 1906 while on vacation with his wife, Ellen Walsh. She stayed with him through thick and thin. He is mainly remembered today for, one, his horrible surveying, and two, a larger street in one of the more northern suburbs. He also acquired land there called OBrien Avenue. For if anybody's from Montreal, it's in Ville Saint Laurent. Okay, now we come to the again, if I can always get this straight. Here we are at Lovells, 1908, 1910. Now, Lovells, I think, is a Montreal company. This is a copy of Lovells. You can see in my small hand here. This is from the 60s. We had it in the house. It was my father-in-law's. It is a business directory. Lovells is over 150 years old as a company, and essentially before the telephone, there was a need for the telephone book. People needed to know the names of people that lived on streets, where businesses were, and lots of people had a Lovells, even before the telephone, just to know where people lived. As a sort of side benefit of Lovells, what happened was you got to see who was living on what streets in what years. And if we look at this Lovells for 1908, 1910, we find that the entry from Monkland Avenue, which was what one of the streets in the exclave was, shows 9 residents, probably living there in unserviced buildings that on land they had bought one lot from Thomas Francis O'Brien. And again, remember at this time, the village of Côte Saint-Luc was mainly farms. Moving on to the next edition of Lovells, which is 1910, 1911, the name Monkland Avenue was moved to its present location in town, which in the last presentation I gave, we discovered the Monklands, which was the home of the Governor General of Canada. So Monklands Avenue, the name was moved to the street that led to Monklands Avenue. Perhaps because the city of Notre Dame was being annexed to the city of Montreal in 1910, and Mr. MacDonald had been a city councillor in the now defunct city of Notre Dame de Grace, he put himself up for election to become a Montreal city councillor. And it's not evident from Lovells, but the boom that Thomas Francis O'Brien had envisioned happening in NDG was happening. In 1912, urbanization was creeping up into the neighborhood of this area, mainly from the south through Westmount, but as well, Queen Mary had become a streetcar transport hub and was also urbanizing. And again, let us not forget that the city of Côte Saint-Luc at this time was largely farmers. So, and if we look at this blow up, Mr. MacDonald was close-up number 5. So you get a picture of him. He had been a city councillor in the former independent municipality of NDG when Georges Marcil was involved in a campaign to prevent the annexation of NDG by the city of Montreal. Dugald Mcdonald was the only person who spoke out in favor of annexation. And there's a park that was also named after him, actually a large park, called MacDonald Park. And if we look at it here, it's interesting to realize that MacDonald died 4 years after being elected to the Montreal City Councillor. So I don't know very much about him. Well, as you can see here, he was a lawyer, a journalist, and a city official. That's what they gave. Born in 1838, dead in 1918. All right, so we finished, again, the De Carys. Jean Descaries. We've now explored Thomas Francis O'Brien. We've got Dugald Mcdonald. And we're coming to our next and probably our biggest, most important player in the story of the little exclave here. So this is Sir Herbert Holt. And again, some of you may remember Sir Herbert Holt from my Circle Road tour. He was trained as an engineer. He was born in Ireland. He was in charge of building he's in charge of building the part of the Canadian Pacific Railroad that ran through the Rocky Mountains, which is where he made his initial fortune. He made another fortune as president of the Royal Bank in Canada. In 1886, he turned to financial endeavors in Montreal, and among his creations was the Montreal Light, Heat and Power Company, which was a monopoly and later was nationalized by the province to become Hydro-Quebec. Holt also had a hand in Montreal's tramway system and in the building of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. He is reputed to have had a net worth of $200 million, although some have estimated his wealth at more than 10 times that amount. And I don't know if we're dealing with current millions of dollars or millions of dollars 100 years ago, but frankly, once we're in the millions, who cares? Like they say about the billionaires for the billionaires tax, they won't miss the money. He may not even have known. In any case, by 1914, Holt had assessed a substantial income through shrewd business dealings and a favorable business climate in a city experiencing explosive growth. And remember, at the time, this was the biggest city in Canada. It was the metropolis. Holt and a group of 7 other entrepreneurs were able to prevail among the Quebec government, upon the Quebec government, to incorporate something called the town of Hampstead on February 19th, 1914. This was not Holt's first real estate development, as we know, and prevail upon the province. The guy had huge amounts of power. They couldn't have resisted him. Just to let you know that the Montreal Gazette, when Holt died in 1941, called him the richest man in Canada, even though his detractors, while acknowledging his business acumen, labeled him as one of the most ruthless men in the Dominion. Montreal had a AAA baseball team, and there was a game going on when his death was announced in the stands. People booed. I mean, that's heartbreaking. One, that he had so much power that his death was announced, and 2, that they booed him. Popularly, he was hated. Now we're going back to our little map of sort of reference map from the registry office for farms. And Assembly Bill 59, creating Hampstead, assembled the lots from, they're all around here. You can see the numbers. 69, 72, 73, 74, 76, 77, 80, and 81. He had already developed Circle Road on the model of the Garden Suburb. And if we look at the current map of Hampstead and how it fits into these areas, we can see that the roads are not straight, that there are lots of parks. This little green rectangle is our little exclave of Côte Saint-Luc. So founded under the principles of the Garden City. Montreal tried to annex the town twice, in 1916 and 1924. It poured concrete in the sewer line to Côte Saint-Luc in 1920. And this development probably changed the course of development for the entire west end of the city of Montreal. Now, if we look north of Fleet Road, over here, the whole northern part of the town was a country club. And in the 1970s, the area was developed and sort of ended the de facto restriction for Jews in the town. When the town was made, it was never legal. It was never legally said, but Jews did not live in Hampstead, which meant that it was a great place to go to look at Christmas decorations. But the fact of the matter is that by the 70s, when they were developing this area, the Jewish community was moving into this area in great numbers, and eventually the idea fell. The area, the city is now, I think, 80% Jewish. This little area here remember, this is Dufferin Road, which was not in Hampstead. And then this little area here is this exclave of the city of Côte Saint-Luc. How did this all come to happen? So let's see. All right, and moving on here. I love this article. Will Hampstead town be stone in Montreal's neck? So let's read what's in this yellow area. The territory of the town is in that part of the parish of Montreal known as Côte Saint-Luc. The town is situated west of MacDonald Avenue and north of Côte Saint-Luc Road in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce ward. The town has left a strip between the city and its own territory in the form of a long T. Remember that horizontal, also exclave of the city of Côte Saint-Luc? It is 400 feet wide and a mile in length. This land is in Côte Saint-Luc and is the property of a land company, Sir Montague Allen and the Montreal Jockey Club. All of this land will eventually be included in the city. That was a wish. At the moment, the west side of MacDonald Avenue and both sides of Dufferin, for a distance of a mile, belong to Côte Saint-Luc, and the farmers were not happy. So this is from 1914. And here we have the symbol of the Princess Patz. So this really is a story about the A. Hamilton Gault. He was a war hero in the First World War, a Montreal veteran of the South African War, and he raised an infantry battalion of ex-soldiers to contribute $100,000 towards the cost of establishing the Princess Patz. Unsaid in this article is the fact that he had bought most of the lots in Thomas Francis O'Brien's division and hadn't developed them. So he owned the land that was on Dufferin Road, and it was not included in the town of Hampstead because they were not going for the properties that had already been subdivided by Thomas Francis O'Brien. So, but the land was empty. And if we look at this letter from A. Hamilton Gault, who I don't exactly have the explanation of who he was. Here we have the fact that the creation of the mascot of this army, I don't want to say battalion, but in any case, the Princess Patz was a bear named Winnipeg, and the bear had to be sort of kept at the London Zoo when they went over to Europe, and so they shortened the name of the bear to Winnie. And one of the visitors to the zoo, A.A. Milne, began writing the book Winnie the Pooh, and that is how we got Winnie the Pooh. But Hamilton Gault, I haven't quite put together the whole story, but when looking at my notes, and it's funny when you're doing these things, 1 second. Mr. Owen Roberts represented Hamilton Gault, and this was in 1924. Again, remember that most of Côte Saint-Luc on the other side of Hampstead was still farmers. He sent a letter to the Côte Saint-Luc Village Council, November 3rd, 1924, to annex lands belonging to the Gault estate, either to Montreal or to Hampstead. He wants to construct houses and requires water, sewer, sidewalk, and street facilities on Dufferin Avenue in Queen Mary. The Côte Saint-Luc City Council has already seen that the city of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce had gone broke, floating bonds to put in these improvements. And the council says that they cannot meet his request for services, but that they have no objection if this land be annexed to either Hampstead or Montreal. So on November 24th, 1925, Hampstead passes bylaw number 23 to annex the lands. But they were not annexing the land on MacDonald Avenue. And here is pretty graphically why. If I can get my slide to turn. Come on, slide. Yes. All right. Here we have 55153 Queen Mary. So let us take a look at the city limits of this apartment building. This is Queen Mary Road. The black pavement is in the city of Hampstead, now the city, but then the town of Hampstead. But the sidewalk is in Côte Saint-Luc, and the building is in Côte Saint-Luc. And so this sidewalk is also in Côte Saint-Luc. This street is in Côte Saint-Luc to this line halfway through, except over here, where this line is the city of Hampstead. And on the other side of that line is the city of Montreal. And that's how things came to work. Now, why is this so critical? It's an apartment building. The town of Hampstead was built on the principles of the garden suburb. You were only allowed to build a single family house. They couldn't annex territory which contained an apartment building. And I've gotten this information from about the builder of this building, who was Sabatino Damiani, from his grandson, Robert Martini, in 2007. That first building, well, both of these buildings were built by Sabatino Damiani, who was an Italian immigrant. The first building over here was built in 1922, and so was in place when the city of Hampstead was looking to annex the territory along Dufferin Road. And Damiani immigrated from Italy, used traditional building methods. There was a concrete floor between the garage level and the next floor, which is now standard in the National Building Code, but wasn't then. His walls had double cavities. There was one gigantic furnace for two separate buildings. The garage was added to increase 12 parking spaces to 25, perhaps ending the servitude with the city of Hampstead, which allowed the people that lived in that building to park on the street in front of their house. Ron Martini said that his grandfather always had problems getting snow on Queen Mary cleaned. I guess neither municipality wanted to take responsibility for it. And when the building, that first building, was being built, Damiani said that Queen Mary Road was unpaved to DeCarry Boulevard, which is about 5 blocks. It was a field. There was a gate, and his grandfather had to trek through the field to get to his construction site. And that was borne out by another person, Monsieur Érigin Gaudin, who was a longtime resident of Hampstead, a city official, and he described the land along Queen Mary Road as an orchard. So probably the annexation of the land on Snowdon Boulevard, on Dufferin Road, spurred development in this area. Okay, and so we're going from this building. Now, this building was built in the 1940s. Damiani sold his first building in order to get the money to build the second building. And again, as we saw on the other side of that little tongue of Hampstead, the street is in Hampstead, the building is in Côte Saint-Luc. And he built further into that littlest area of the exclave, he built another building, 5010 MacDonald, where his, and again, you can note the style, the similarity of styles with peaks and coins. Simply, this building was owned by his granddaughter. I guess he was building for his children, and could not be, that kind of building was simply not allowed in the town of Hampstead. So getting ready to meet the next important personage. Here we have Lovells in 1949. And well, we've gotten a lot more people living on MacDonald. There were largely single-family cottages in the area, except for the apartments, the few apartments that we've seen. And the area of Côte Saint-Luc was completely occupied, even though the area of Montreal that was adjacent was largely unbuilt upon, because there were lower taxes in Côte Saint-Luc. And here we have, I love these things. These are fire insurance maps that show the buildings. And we've got the entire Côte Saint-Luc digit, the entire Côte Saint-Luc exclave in this portrait. And as we can see, this is the Damiani building. The other buildings hadn't been built in 1940. We've got a couple of small apartment buildings on, I believe this is Langhorne, or no, that's Ellerdale. And then this is Langhorne. We see a collection of small houses that were built on the lots that were divided by Thomas Francis OBrien. Nothing in the area of the OBrien project that was in the city of Montreal. And more people are moving in. The area is getting settled. It's service, probably over the objections of the farmers in Côte Saint-Luc. And here we have MacDonald Avenue. And now let's go to Lovells in 1955. So if we look at Lovells in 1955, there's way more people. How did that happen? Well, the indication is once again on these fire maps, fire insurance maps. I shouldn't say a fire map. So here we have, this area is the digit. So here we have the Damiani first building, Damiani second building. The third building hasn't been built. But here we have a close-up, possibly a year or two later, and we start to see some interesting things. So here's our Damiani building. Here's our second Damiani building, our third Damiani building. And then if we look here, we blow it up, we get foundation reinforced concrete. So a building with reinforced concrete foundations is being built. And by the way, this is the Caron building, and this area is the Luck Garden Supplies with their greenhouses. So we'll come to those later. If we move on now, oh, I've got to go back down. All right. So that building that we saw the foundations of was being built by Federal Construction Incorporated. And this is a picture of Romick Hornstein and his wife Hanka. Again, somebody I interviewed. She was quite fascinating. The company was founded by 1951. The original partnership was between Romick Hornstein and Fred Lowy. And the Lowys, husband and wife, were killed in an automobile accident in Switzerland shortly after these first projects were begun in the 50s. But before the accident, the two men had brought in Romick's brother, Michael, as a partner. And Michael has a fascinating story. He eventually became the president. He was the older brother of Romick, and he tended to boss him around. He's actually quite a famous man. He's an art collector and a builder. This was taken in an interview I had with him in September 5th, 2006. This picture is taken when he was receiving the National Order of Quebec in 2013. He was born September 17th, 1920 in Poland. He spent his childhood in Krakow, where he graduated from business school. And he was a crackerjack businessman. He died April 25th, 2016 at the age of 95 in his adopted city of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Michal was captured by the German army during World War II. He was forced onto a train and deported to Auschwitz. However, before the train reached the notorious concentration camp, Hornstein jumped from its side. He spent much of the war in the forests of Czechoslovakia. And then he lived in Budapest before decamping for Bratislava. In Bratislava, he met Renata Wittelsen, another Polish Jew fleeing Nazi persecution. Wittelsen had spent much of the war in hiding in the Warsaw Ghetto, in a convent, and a Polish family, and in safe houses. And it is in one of those safe houses that the couple met. In 1946, they were married in Rome. They were on the last train out of Bratislava before the Iron Curtain fell. He immigrated to Canada in 1951 at the encouragement of the Canadian ambassador to Italy, whom they had befriended, and he relocated in Montreal. He became a citizen in 1957 and became part of the company Federal Construction Limited that his brother had founded with Fred Lowy, where he made his fortune. Now, just talking about how did this happen? This man was brilliant, and he was walking around the area and noticed, I guess it was the signs that sort of said, you know how when you come into a municipality, it says, welcome to Montreal, welcome to Hampstead. He noticed that there was a block between welcome to Hampstead and welcome to Montreal, and eventually found out about the existence of this bizarre little strip of Côte Saint-Luc. And he told me originally it was the mayor. He said it was Mayor Boyer, but there was never a Mayor Boyer in Côte Saint-Luc. And so it must have been a building inspector or something. And he asked, well, what are the building regulations in your little area? And this man, Boyer, this is the one bit of profanity you're going to hear in this lecture, said to him, build whatever the fuck you want. That was his quote to me. And he took him at his word. He went and he bought up every piece of property in the little exclave that he could lay his hands on. And Mr. Hornstein told me that what he would do is he would buy the properties. He would keep the owners there as tenants. This is before rent controls or, any sorts of controls that conferred rights on tenants. And he would simply wait until he needed the land for a building and let these people go. I guess he'd give them a year or something. He may have even compensated them a little. But in short, he was acquiring property that was valued as if it was in the sticks and building buildings that were 15, 16 stories high so that he was getting a value that was way beyond what the purchase price of the buildings justified. Just to give you an idea of the money that they had, Renata and Michal Hornstein became prominent patrons of major Montreal institutions, including hospitals and universities. But the couple is most closely associated with the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. Michal Hornstein had served on its board of trustees almost continuously from 1970 until his death. He also played an important role raising funds for the museum's collection, amassing a vast collection of Renaissance paintings and helping raise millions that went toward restoring and expanding the museum. Michal Hornstein contributed to the collection himself, donating some 420 works of art, and played a role in the acquisition of 23 others. In 2012, the couple announced that they were donating their collection of 75 old master paintings to the museum, a gift estimated to be worth $75 million Canadian. The Montreal Museum of Fine Arts described it as the largest ever private donation to a Quebec museum. The Old Masters collection is housed in the Michal and Renata Hornstein Pavilion for Peace, which opened in November 2016. The couple's name also graces another pavilion of the museum, which houses galleries dedicated to Asian and Islamic art. And they gave to other charities as well, including hospitals, the Montreal Heart Institute, the Jewish General Hospital. It was quite an impressive story. Now, moving right along, we come to, this is the building that we saw the foundations being built for on the map. This is 5020 MacDonald. It's not as high as the later buildings. It also uses normal size brick. They use larger brick, and we've got a couple of decorative panels here. More interestingly, the central part of the building is recessed with a little decorative drive, which seems very nice until you realize how narrow the lots were in this area. And so because they moved this area back, they couldn't use any of the area behind the building, which in some of their other projects became an outdoor pool. As we walk along MacDonald going north, we go beyond the Damiani buildings, and we come to what this is called the Caron building. It was there when Mr. Hornstein arrived in 1955. It probably, well, the grandson of Damiani said that he probably built it. We don't know. In any case, it becomes obvious that the vocation, because of the lack of zoning, to build higher rise buildings became evident. And once that was built, this is the last building you can see in the distance. This is the last property that was built. It's 5140. It's the last of the federal construction buildings. We'll see the others on the way, but you can see the evolution of style. This building was built, let me get the date, in 1978. Hornstein himself lived on the top floor in a condo unit with a large terrace and a 15-foot high ceiling to accommodate his art collection. It's currently for sale today because they've died, and I guess the heirs are selling it. I believe the asking price is $5 million. One of the residents there can remember seeing a crane pull up to the building to transport their art collection that they had given to the Fine Arts Museum off of the terrace on the top of the building. And I do have to admit that my mother-in-law, who lives in this building, can remember in 1948 going to the greenhouse that was there and buying the flowers for her wedding. So this is gives you an idea of the change of scale of these buildings. Here we have the Caron building, and here we have 5140. And it's not, 5140 is the only building that they built as a condo, but as was the habit of, well, I guess I'll say Jewish immigrants, but immigrants, often they banded together to do things and avoid taking all the risk on their own. Most of these buildings were built, whether the property was owned by the Hornsteins, they built a lot of those buildings with a Mr. Eisenstein. This building sold between $80 and $85 a square foot, but after the, we call it the PQ, the Indépendantiste election in 1976, Mr. Hornstein saw the writing on the wall, didn't want to take a chance. He diversified his company. Half of their operations moved to Chicago. And the Doré building, again, partially built by Mr. Eisenstein, who was an engineer, is very similar to other federal construction buildings that were built between 1954 and 1973. And this includes 5350 and 5500 MacDonald. And these are all in this very tiny little strip of territory of Côte Saint-Luc. So here we have, I received, after I did one of these presentations, a letter from Gerald Eisenman, who is the president of the Côte Saint-Luc Building Corporation. And he wrote, "My father Peter was actually the one who put up 5150, 5350, and 5500 MacDonald. We also put up 5140 years later. I would be very interested in getting a copy, if possible, of your Zoom meeting from yesterday. We've always wondered how those two blocks were in Côte Saint-Luc. Please feel free to contact me at any time." And 5500, if 5140 was the house for the Hornsteins, 5500 was the house for the Eisenmans. From the 10th floor on in 5500 MacDonald, the units are custom made. There's a squash court in the basement as well as a gymnasium. There's an indoor swimming pool as well. Mr. Eisenman, Mr. Hornstein's partner and engineer of many of the buildings, was an enthusiastic swimmer. And I have friends who live in most of these buildings. My friend Raymond Grant, who lives in this building, told me that Mr. Eisenman died in the swimming pool of the Jewish Community Center shortly after he occupied an apartment in this building. And so here we've come and we've seen the evolution of this area from sort of abandoned land to settled by French Canadian farmers who were there as a result of fear of attack by First Nations. And I'm going to leave the last word to my friend Alan Becker, another person I interviewed about this. The little white cottage in the painting by the late Montreal artist Heine Charney was located directly across the road from our home at 5395 MacDonald Avenue. It was painted from inside our living room picture window and was one of several modest cottages stretching from the low-rise apartment building on the corner of MacDonald and Ellerdale to the low-rise apartment building, I think it is pinkish brick, diagonally opposite our house. The dark apartment building on the corner of MacDonald and Dupuis Langhorne also required the demolition of one or two small cottages. Not sure how many. Moving on. The west side of MacDonald, that's the area in the exclave, was charming and somewhat bucolic. The block felt like it was part of a quiet community. That feeling was destroyed by the construction of the tall apartment buildings. We transitioned from suburban serenity to the claustrophobia of a concrete jungle. One of the consequences of the erection of these structures is that they created a wind vortex in front of our home. The wind that blew down from Mount Royal, the slope begins at Côte des Neiges and plateaus at Tacari, on its way westward was now blocked by the new apartment buildings. That obstacle created a whirlwind in front of our home. And of course, street parking, which had once been a delight, became challenging. And that's really where we end. The last step in this is, if you want to know more, I've recently published a book based on the information in this presentation to create an easily understandable but fictional narrative. The fictional aspects of the book are created to make the history of this area less dry and frankly, more understandable, and transfer the immediacy of this tour into a written format. The book is available on Kindle in both ebook and paperback formats, and I believe that Jenna will put the address for those in the chat. And so thank you very much for your patience. I assume by now there will be a few questions that I will try and answer.
Well, Norm, everyone loved your storytelling, and we didn't get a lot of questions, mainly compliments on your presentation. But one was, so is this area still not part of Montreal? It's an independent.
It's part of the city, still not part of Montreal, city of Côte Saint-Luc. And literally, there's one area that's a quarter of a block.
And does it have its own government and municipal? I mean,
no, it is part of a ward in the city of Côte Saint-Luc. Remember when I went back originally and I showed the map and I showed the gulf of territory, which is mainly the town of Hampstead, between the two little sections of territory of the city of Côte Saint-Luc and the main section of the territory of Côte Saint-Luc.
There was this question, is this island of Côte Saint-Luc an ethnic or linguistic enclave?
It is neither. Frankly, it is, I think, very much, although the people in Hampstead would not admit it, it is a very much needed integral part of the urban fabric there, because the very gracious single-family homes in Hampstead do not work for people that come to a certain age. And so what would happen would be that people would give up their homes in Hampstead and then move to these high-rise apartments, and eventually, as has been the case with my mother-in-law, and from there moved to a senior's residence. But people wanted to have apartment buildings in this area, and because of the garden suburb movement, couldn't get them.
The one question, you probably have answered this, did the respective jurisdictional authorities drive the changes in the built environment and related elements, or was it the residents?
Well, frankly, it was the owners of the land. I mean, this, as far as I'm concerned, the genius of Michael Hornstein was that he saw the possibility of the land.
I'll just relate a personal experience. You know, the first time I took an airplane was in 1967 to visit Expo 67. And the man
Oh, Jay, you've frozen.
I ended up working for 10 years. And Norm, oh, it says my internet is unstable.
Yeah, you froze for a bit.
Okay. So I had the opportunity of working with Paul Landy for 10 years, and he was the mechanical engineer on that, on the US Pavilion. As I've told you, I stayed with my grandmother's cousin, and until like 2 years ago, I never realized that we probably still had family in Montreal. So I've reconnected with them.
How nice.
Yes. People wanted to know what prompted your leap to living in a new country like Canada, and how difficult was it to let go of the USA?
Well, number one, I'm still a US citizen, and I am a Canadian citizen. And I sort of hate to say this, but it's legal here now, so I can. It was marijuana. I don't know if you know about the Rockefeller laws, but Governor Rockefeller in New York, in his attempt to get a presidential nomination as a Republican, put through a series of very draconian laws. And a friend of mine was going to university in New York State and got caught. And they told him he'd be put away for life, and etc. And I was in St. Louis. It was one of the last days that I was in St. Louis, and he called me, and he was sobbing on the phone. My second language in school was German, and I really wanted to go to Germany, and I figured I would finally get some sort of fluency. And he said he was moving to Montreal. He was leaving the country. Did I want to move with him? And I said, well, for a year, why not? I really don't know what I'm doing. And my parents were so unhappy about me moving to Germany. So I figured, I'll move like 400 miles away. I'll move to Montreal. Obviously, we moved separately. We became roommates, and he left Montreal. He didn't like Montreal, and he was able to negotiate his prison sentence, his life sentence, etc., down to a $500 fine, and settled back in the United States. And I said, well, you know what? I'll stay another year. I'll stay another year. I met my wife. I wound up opening up my architecture office, and I never left.
There's what. Can you comment on the town of Montreal near the Jewish cemetery?
Yes, I had seen that before, and I can. Let's see, I'm not sharing, but let's see if I've got this open.
And this is probably the last question we can field because we are running over.
Okay. Well, I had a picture of Malcolm Barclay. I will try and, oh, I'm not going to, oh, here it is. Oh, good. So I'm going to share this. And this is Malcolm Drummond Barclay, who was the surveyor, not only of my first tour, Circle Road, the town of Hampstead, and the town of Mount Royal, which were all real estate ventures by very wealthy men. I don't know if Holt was involved with the creation of the town of Mount Royal, but it was a project of the Canadian Northern Railroad. And one of the main streets in the town of Mount Royal is Kenora. Again, it's a town that was founded on the principles of the Garden Suburb. And it really is beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful to go through. It's to the north of the mountain. And unlike the situation that we had with the town of Hampstead, the town of Mount Royal is connected to downtown by a train that goes through a tunnel that pierces the entire mountain and goes from downtown to the town of Mount Royal. And this is a picture. Can you say, are you getting the picture of Malcolm? Yeah, Malcolm yes. Barclay Drummond.
Yes, but I'm more interested in the picture of Norm Washington U grad. So scroll down so we can see that.
Oh, that's with Norm Washington. Oh, here we are. Okay, there we go. Maybe some of you recognize me.
Talk about a flashback. So Jenna, do you have any concluding remarks?
Nope, I'm good. You guys can go ahead and wrap us up.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I think it's your call, Jay. I think you have the goodbye.
Oh, do I have the goodbye? See how well rehearsal went? Well, as I expected, it was a fascinating story. And Norm was a little concerned that he would come off a little flat by reading it, but your personality shone through. And I think you've got a loyal following of people that would like to attend another one. So thank you for all the time and effort you put into this. It was great reconnecting with you again. And I want to see you at the reunion in Washington U, May 19th.
I will do my best.
All right. Thanks, Norm.
Bye, Jay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jay. Bye, Norman.
Bye.
Bye, Jenna.
Rebecca.
Oh,
Bye,
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
I didn't recognize, I should have recognized the voice, of course.
I loved it, Norman. I particularly loved the part about what the developer was told. He could do whatever the fuck he wanted. And I will call you and Jay later. It was wonderful.
Super.
Take care.
All righty.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.